When Dallas, Kane, and Lambert ventured into the mysterious derelict vessel on LV-426, they discovered the pilot or space jockey along with its deadly cargo, the Ovomorphs. Decades later, Russ and Ann Jordan would enter the derelict hoping to get rich by claiming the find. In the Alien Special Edition, we only see the two enter and then exit the ship. But in the Alien novel River of Pain by Christopher Golden, we learn of the horrors that they encountered inside, shining a bit more light on the events that led to the extermination of the derelict's space jockey crew. Perched up high in the rover, Newt and her brother Timmy would watch anxiously as their parents entered the bizarre alien craft. Anne was nervous and puzzled by the ship's biomechanical makeup. She wanted to call in the find and take the kids back to town, but Russ was excited and reminded her that this find could set them up for life. Once inside, the air was cold, yet it was heavy with humidity. They come to a spiral walkway that leads to a lower level, and the two decide that anything of worth would be stored in the cargo area, which would likely be below, so they head on down the path. But Anne stops when she sees pits and scars that appear to be melted into the wall and the floor. Unfazed, Russ just says later and continues on. But as they do so, she starts seeing more and more of the damage, which we know is caused by the xenomorph's acidic blood. But now she's seeing a new form of damage, where holes are blasted into the walls from some sort of weapon. Looking to take pictures of the area, Russ turns on a brighter light, and to their unease, they see that the texture on the walls is not biomechanical anymore. Whatever is on the walls here seems to be entirely organic. It's black and gleaming like an insect cocoon or a volcanic rock. Anne would break off a piece of it, noting that it was chitinous and hard but brittle at the same time. Now Russ was finally beginning to worry like Anne was, but even so, they pressed on, hoping to find an engine room or pilot's cabin nearby. As the reader, you can tell that Anne is beginning to figure things out here when she notices that she can't shake the feeling that she's trapped in a spider's web or maybe the nest of a wasp. After heading down another level, they find their first alien bodies. Something about it suggested an insect, which gave her an unnerving connection to her thoughts about the hard substance that coated the walls. Yet this was no bug. But Russ just said that it had been dead for a long time, and that it was going to make them rich. Now further into the ship, they notice that the alien hive material has now completely taken over the halls, and Anne sees even more of the spatters from the alien's blood. At a curve in the hallway, they find 3 more Xeno bodies. One is torn in half, while another has an enormous hole through its midsection. There are doors on either side, but many of them have been sealed shut by the hive material. Looking to the doors that they can access, they find some kind of livestock pens and a room with thick metal alloy shelves with mounds of something that had been rotted away. Continuing on, they find even more xenomorph bodies, now in clusters and piled up. They then find the corpse of something different. The new creature, more humanoid than the first, was larger than the others, 9 feet tall at least. All that remained of his body was its skeleton. The bones were in some kind of exosuit using the same kind of biomechanical design as the ship. Feeling like they finally found the evidence that they need to stake their claim, they took several minutes to record the area before heading out. However, while on the way out, they notice a corridor that heads off towards the crux of the ship. They've come this far, so why not check it out? Around the next corner, to their surprise, they find one of each of the 2 alien species, locked in a terrible embrace. But this bug-like creature was different from its brethren. It was larger, and had a large, ridged plate on its bright blue head that seemed to be a kind of crest. "What the hell happened here?" muttered Russ. "War," said Anne. "The question is, where did the bugs come from? Were they on the ship? In the cargo hold? Or were they already here on Acheron and attacked the ship after the crash?" "And what about this one?" Russ asked. "Why is it so different?" "It's a queen." "What? You mean like with bees? Doesn't this all remind you of a hive? Maybe the others are like drones, and this one is like a queen." She gestured at the crested walls. She then shrugged. "Or maybe that crest on its head just makes me think of a crown." The alien she thought of as a queen had impaled the crewman with its tail, but the crewman had given as good as he'd gotten. He thrust his left arm up inside the queen's jaws as if he tried to destroy its brain with the bare hand. Now Russ is getting uncomfortable, so they decide to move on, where they find what some call the pilot or the space jockey in its chair. It's the same one found by the crew of the Nostromo. They crawl up onto it to inspect it, where they find the hole in its rib cage. Russ thinks it was done externally by an alien, but Anne sees that the ribs are broken outwards from the chest. Whatever did this came out of him. She then stumbles back, nearly falling off of the chair and now facing the back wall, where she sees the egg chamber, and of course, they choose to investigate. The air in the chamber is very humid, like the ship is drawing in moisture from outside and holding it here in this area. Anne, who was the first one to be anxious and cautious here, is now more curious instead, making me think of Alien Prototype, a novel made well after River of Pain that proposes that ovomorphs use pheromones to lure hosts in, lowering their inhibitions. Anne thinks to herself that whatever they are, they must be dead by now like everything else. Should we bring one back? She starts examining one of them. Are they pulsing? Russ asked. She sees it, but she thinks to herself, these can't be alive. They've obviously been here for millennia, like dead flowers. She reaches for the closest one, only a foot away, and Russ says, wait, we don't know what they are. She turns to him and smiles. If they're toxic, my gloves will protect me. Let's set up the camera, take some images, and Simpson can worry about them, Russ urged. Now where's your sense of adventure? Only to see her husband's eyes widen at the same time as she heard a wet, sticky, peeling noise from behind her. Russ grabbed her arm and hauled her toward him. Beyond Russ, he saw the pod opening, strings of mucus hanging from the four petal-like flaps as it split apart. Something shifted and jerked inside the object. Russell, she said, suddenly afraid. It's all right, he told her, glancing over at the pod. The thing within launched itself at him, latched onto his face, and he tried to scream. The sound became a horrible gagging as he stumbled back into her. Anne cried out his name as she shoved and dragged and urged him up onto the platform. Only there did she see the back of the hideous spider thing that had attached itself to him. It's all right, he had said, but it was not all right, nor would it ever be all right again. Now in the past, all we knew about the derelict on LV-426 was that a lone space jockey died in the chair from an alien, and that its cargo was full of alien eggs. But now we see that there were other space jockeys on the ship, and that there was more than a single alien breakout. The aliens were able to produce a queen on the ship, and were able to cover a large amount of it in hive material. Personally, I'm not sure if I like the hive material aspect. To me, all of the derelict that we saw in 1979's Alien looked biomechanical and not like hive structure. Though if you do like the idea of hive materials on the derelict, it could explain the differences in looks from the more organic ship here and the more machined look of the engineered juggernaut.
Bones had been outward, like he exploded from inside.
In 1979's Alien, a team from the Nostromo, while investigating the alien beacon emanating from the derelict ship on LV-426, would encounter the Space Jockey, the alien also known as the pilot, or later, a member of the Malakak. It was a bizarre creation of famed artist H.R. Giger that was seemingly grafted to, or perhaps even growing out of its chair. Surprisingly, they were left unexplained on film for 33 years until the release of Prometheus. But long before that, 10 years after Alien in 1989, a major part of the Alien Expanded Universe began with Dark Horse's release of the initial run of the Aliens comic books. In Part 1, now called Outbreak, we're introduced to a new living space jockey with amazing technology and a hatred for the xenomorph and mankind alike. At the end of Outbreak, Hicks and Newt are with a team of Marines on the homeworld of the xenomorph, but they're unable to leave as they're trapped on their landing craft surrounded by attacking aliens. When suddenly, in a blinding flash of light, the aliens are all killed off. The two of them exit the ship, only to find a suited space jockey floating motionless several feet off the ground. Newt felt that it had dead eyes, both seen and not seen. It had destroyed the aliens, but not for their sake. It didn't speak, but something exploded inside her head, bright like a million suns. The images boiled up from a deeper place. The same plane as primal instinct, hunger, pain, fear, and hatred. Forced back into her memories, she saw herself with her family in the crawler on LV-426, and they were approaching the derelict ship. Her parents went inside and she watched them on a monitor feed, where they encountered the dead space jockey. The living one knew that she had seen this wreckage, and shared with her a grotesque form of empathy. She could see a Juggernaut ship, and there was a jockey on board, along with Xenomorph eggs. One got loose and infected him, causing him to crash his ship on a nearby moon. The moon was LV-426, and this new pilot was a friend of the one who perished on Acheron, where his deadly cargo would be waiting for Newt's parents and the Nostromo crew to later find. The living pilot had come to the alien homeworld out of hate, and it had rescued them in the name of revenge. Now safe from the advancing Xenomorphs, the two would leave the alien world and return to Earth, or what's left of it, from the alien invasion. The situation is grim, and now the higher-ups are leaving the planet. So the two decide to leave as well, and as they make their exit, Newt is once again connected telepathically to the jockey. He appears to her once more, but he's changed since the homeworld. It followed them back to Earth, and it's aware of Dr. Arona's plan, a plan to use nuclear weapons to try to kill off the Xenomorphs. Initially, she thought that the alien had shared their thirst for vengeance with the Xenos. They led it home in the belief that it may want to help them, but they were wrong. It shared many of their human emotions, hate, anger, and the desire to conquer. It no longer cared about the aliens. Its interest had shifted. The soldiers assumed that they would return one day and terraform Earth for themselves, but the pilot would watch and would be waiting for them, and it told Newt just to let her know, as if bragging out of spite. In the novelized version of the comic Earth Hive by Steve Perry, the jockey, also called a collector from their egg collecting habit, is gloating and filled with a snide sense of joy. It lusted and felt superior. It hated, it raged, and felt many other feelings humans just can't understand, adding that it might return with other Malakak to take Earth from the winners. There is a brief mention of the Space Jockey in part 3 of the alien invasion story Female War, but we don't catch up with it again until the short story follow-up, The Alien. Here, the pilot is still in orbit around Earth and is now terraforming the planet. The temperate zones have cooled an average of nearly 40 degrees, and the president himself is leading a team to meet with the alien on its request. He consults his advisors about Arona's bombs, thinking that they should have made the Earth uninhabitable for years to come, and he's told he would be right if the bombs had indeed all gone off. Unfortunately, Dr. Arona made no secret of his intentions, broadcasting his message around the Earth and deep into space. They believe that the pilot of the terraforming vessel saw this message and then circumvented Arona's detonator and removed the warheads of the fusion bombs in the stockpile. Whether the pilot was gathering materials for the plasma generator, or was just ensuring that another lunatic wouldn't threaten its new home, they don't know. They also feel that it had no idea how to destroy the aliens without destroying this new home, but Ripley took care of much of that issue when she lured most of the aliens to the Queen Mother, where they would be destroyed by the older nukes of Arona's that were left untouched. But not all of the aliens were killed. After giving a valiant speech, the president and his team board the Juggernaut ship. The alien giant towers over them, with the Earth Hive novel stating that it stood 7 to 8 meters or 23 to 26 feet tall. Surely this is a brilliant creature capable of single-handedly altering the climates of the entire Earth, yet its eyes convey no intellect at all, void of expression and feeling, cold and empty like the eyes of a dead animal. Suddenly the president feels pain in his forehead, and the pilot is in his mind. He wants us to go this way. We must all disrobe completely, as they are exposed to a massively bright light that burns off the top layer of their skin. The others worry that the president's mind might be under control, but they have no other options. Now on the bridge, the alien is seen with screens all around him, showing the Xenomorphs on Earth. One of the crew notes that this is the bridge, but there are no manual controls. Perhaps the ship's functions respond to the pilot's voice. The president then says that he hopes that we can settle this quickly and peacefully, and introduces his Secretary of State, who timidly reaches out to shake the jockey's hand. The pilot takes his hand and pauses for a moment before violently jerking him, breaking and snapping his arm while twisting the poor guy in the air. Chaos ensues as the alien, now in a fighting stance, attacks the team. In the carnage, we see that everyone outside of the president is an android. Even so, the Malakak makes short work of the team, while one of them, still barely functioning, tells the president he must move quickly. Now with the alien giant looming over the president, he pulls out a fake tooth, one with a chamber for concealment, and takes a few drops of liquid onto his tongue. Seconds later, a chestburster erupts and the jockey is in sheer terror as the alien latches onto him. Just then, a disfigured but still functioning android reaches into his own stomach and pulls out a device to communicate with. Enemy vessel operations have been interrupted. I repeat, operations have been interrupted. Our scheduled offensive should be launched immediately. Blasting off from the surface below comes a volley of nuclear missiles, and they smash into the alien ship, destroying it in a brilliant flash of light. So the Outbreak pilot was a friend of the one found dead on LV-426. Unfortunately, outside of this series and another comic, Aliens Apocalypse: The Destroying Angels, there's little to be known of the pre-engineer Malakak. Ridley Scott would use the prequels to explain that the two aliens are the same thing, but with his series left unfinished, there's no evidence that the corpse seen on the Derelict on LV-426 is in fact an engineer in a suit, a possibility even brought up in the Alien role-playing game. However, like the engineers, both races have a full range of human emotions and beyond. In particular, we see them displaying what we know of as negative emotions: hate, anger, greed, and the lust for power. Both of them fear the alien, though the engineers may also revere and respect them from a safe distance. And they may both harbor hatred for artificial life as they attack them on sight. The two, if separate, both seek the end of humanity, and afterwards either of them may terraform Earth to use how they see fit. But where the engineers wore suits to take on the look of the Malakak, these aliens had that look naturally, and instead wore human-like spacesuits likely to survive in inhospitable environments. As seen on the alien homeworld, the suit appeared to be fully contained, had tones of green for its color, with a yellow transparent helmet. Its boots seemed to suggest that it had hooved feet, and there's room for a tail on its back. Most notably though, he's got a handheld device with two screens or panels in his right hand, and a larger device in the left hand that is connected to his hip. This appears to be the weapon that he used to kill the aliens. Both hands could be holding two parts of a weapon, or two separate devices. This portrayal of the Space Jockey doesn't line up with H.R. Giger's and Dan O'Bannon's original ideas of the alien as a peaceful race who didn't realize the eggs were dangerous and loaded them into their cargo. But it does fit in with the Lovecraftian themes behind the alien and the pilot, where they are separate and ancient creatures with no ties to humanity that existed long before the prequels.
Alien life form. Looks like it's been dead a long time. Fossilized.
Aliens Apocalypse is one of my favorite comics from the Dark Horse collection. It gives us a purpose for the Xenomorph, and includes themes and ideas that would actually reappear many years later in the prequel films. But it's not the idea behind the aliens that had me fascinated. Instead, it was the depiction of the Space Jockeys that kept true to the example seen on LV-426. This was no tall, human-like engineer wearing a suit. Instead, they are an ancient and unknown race of giants with no ties to humanity. So let's find out more by exploring the Space Jockey race from Aliens Apocalypse: The Destroying Angels. In Prometheus, engineers in their pilot chairs become what looks like the space jockey seen in the derelict vessel. Though it could be an aesthetic choice, the engineers here are much smaller than the original jockey was. They are very human in form, but taken to the extreme in bone structure and musculature. They are also the statuesque creators of mankind, the Giger-type aliens, and the Accelerant. Called the Malakak or Space Jockeys in other stories, here they are only referred to as giants. Like the Space Jockey, they are massive, looking like if they were to stand up out of their chair, they would be around 2 to 3 times the size of an average human. They have the classic elephant-like trunk, but unlike other examples, these seem to be much heavier, a bit hunchbacked, and famously, to many a fan's dismay, would have tufts of gray hair on the sides of their heads. There is no mention of them having anything to do with the creation of mankind, and even though it is their ships where the alien eggs are found, they did not create them. They are a race of highly intelligent spacefaring aliens. The original Derelict was discovered by the Nostromo crew on LV-426, and here, a second Derelict is found orbiting a planet in the Shambleau system. The second ship would have the same biomechanical outer shell as the first, but where the original ship was fairly asymmetrical, The newly discovered one had odd proportions, and if I'm seeing this correctly in the few images we have on it, it appears to sit on a vertical axis, unlike the Derelict that sits on the horizontal. Though different in shape on the outside, the inside of the ships were very similar. There was a pilot's chair with a long-dead space jockey, and a vast cavernous cargo area or egg chamber in the lower level, full of xenomorph ovomorphs. The only difference here was that the walls of this chamber were more detailed than the Derelict's were, as it was using H.R. Giger's concept art designs for the egg silo. Even Giger's unused life cycle mural, which he wanted to appear in the chamber, is shown in the comic above each row of eggs. Other than that, the room has the same enormous proportions and is even in the same shape, going off into the distance as the Derelict's was, regardless of the ship's different proportions. A map found on the ship would give a fantastically detailed description of their journey, showing off some of their navigational knowledge. Surprisingly, the map looks strikingly similar to a 2D version of the orrery seen in Prometheus. This map, along with the signal broadcasting from the ship, would point to a planet or moon containing one of the giant cities, thought to be one of thousands of worlds that the giants had colonized. Located in an area of unknown space, the surface of this planet or moon had rock structures not unlike the one seen on LV-426. Carved into the ground was a massive hole with a ramp leading around its edge, allowing passage to its floor. On the walls would be images similar to H.R. Giger's murals, along with shapes and designs commonly seen on their spacecraft. At the bottom would be a vast city that appeared to expand on underground. There were massive buildings, some undeniably phallic shaped, while others had a more feminine look, a common trait of Giger and Giger-inspired artwork. The two buildings at the end of what appears to be a pathway were designed to look like renditions of Giger's unused egg silo. In general, all of the architecture had a bony or ribbed biomechanical look to it, similar to what we see on the spacecraft. They even had what we may consider as art. A mural or statue was found containing 3 giants on a wall. The middle one was massive, and it looked to be sleeping or perhaps in a form of meditation. It had rays extending around its head, almost like it was wearing some kind of decorative headdress, with what could be renditions of alien eggs behind its shoulders. Below him are 2 more sleeping giants in a sideways sitting position that looks similar to the way that they sit in the pilot's chair. Inside one of the structures are the crew of giants from that second Derelict. They are lined up in 2 rows in a room sealed off by a clear glass or plastic-like substance, and appeared to be in a form of hypersleep, but unfortunately, they were all deceased. But there was one survivor, sleeping in another area, the last living giant. All of the others had been carefully sealed away in a chamber and were subjected to some form of catatonic suspension, a process that is unknown yet seems to work on a molecular level. 3.2 billion years ago, the aliens or destroying angels swept through the galaxy in a wave of extermination, the wrath of God killing anything that they encountered. The race of giants were on the verge of annihilation, so they resorted to this and attempted to hibernate to outlast their destroyers. Time eventually did in the others, but this one has lasted for over 3 billion years. Unfortunately though, the last giant would succumb to the aliens when a rogue android would awaken the giant with an ovomorph on its chest, which would in turn infect and kill the creature. The resulting alien would be the Destroyer of Destroyers, a creature known as the Jockey Xenomorph. One that would look like a standard xenomorph in design, yet was much larger and was shown to be in a fit of rage, killing humans, androids, and Xenos alike. And that, my friends, is all we know about the giants of Aliens Apocalypse, the Destroying Angels. Their story is set up as a sequel to the first Alien film, and there was a tie-in black and white comic called Once in a Lifetime, but it doesn't give us any more info on the giants.
What do you got? Well, see what you make of this.
When looking into the history of the Space Jockey, besides the prequels, 2 sources are usually mentioned: the Outbreak trilogy and its follow-up The Alien, and Aliens Apocalypse the Destroying Angels. Yet often forgotten is their involvement in the novel Alien's Original Sin. Released in 2005, the book would be a follow-up to the film Alien Resurrection, and here the pilot's race, or Malakak, are not directly featured in the story, but they are a major player in the background. The android Call, upon hacking into the files of EarthGov, or the Earth's governments, learns that through a shadow group called Loki, named for the trickster god, that EarthGov has been making deals with the Malakak for hundreds of years. In fact, they are the ones responsible for the Nostromo's LV-426 investigation. Weyland-Yutani didn't send the ship to Acheron because they picked up the Derelict's beacon. They did it because Loki told them that the Malakak, along with its deadly cargo of Xeno ovomorphs, was there. And in usual Alien Universe fashion, EarthGov wanted the alien, here called the Encephalopod, to use as a bioweapon. In the world of Original Sin, Weyland-Yutani seems to be a puppet of Loki and the EarthGov, or at the very least, they aren't as in control of things as they normally are. The Malakak are an ancient alien species, and apparently, sterility has become a problem and has grown worse with each succeeding generation. The Xenomorphs, however, are remarkably fertile, and by experimentation, they learned that with a little alien DNA, they could fix their reproductive problems. But to extract it, they would need a fresh supply of aliens. They knew that they could use their own people as hosts, but they didn't want to inflict pain and death on members of their own species. So they negotiated with us in secret for a supply of humans. Entire colonies of people would be given over to them in exchange for clearance to mine the mineral-rich worlds that the pilot's people had already laid claim to. At the time of the Nostromo mission, the Space Jockeys had access to aliens and needed human hosts in order to make them. But by the time of Alien Resurrection, they must need both aliens and humans, as we find them trading alien technology for a colony of already infected people. This idea of the Malakak becoming sterile and needing alien DNA to fix it would get reused in John Spade's first outline for Prometheus called Alien 01: The Master Narrative. But it wouldn't appear in any later drafts, although it would show up in a few fake fan scripts. After all, a species that can create life at will would likely just clone themselves or use fertility treatments like the ones currently used here on Earth to once again reproduce. Unlike the engineers, the Space Jockeys of Original Sin are not the creators of mankind, or of the Xenomorph. But they were able to create a new strain of alien using their own DNA. It was more formidable than the original strain, had a slightly different color, and a larger head, but most notably, their facehuggers could deposit or create dozens of bursters in a host, allowing the alien to spread even faster, something we'd see later with the Pred alien. Now unfortunately, the book never goes into detail on the design of its iteration of the Space Jockey. Ripley 8 does note that the original example in the pilot's chair on LV-426 was 5 meters tall, and that it was covered in alien resin. A curious observation that's never been made before. Though this statement should be taken with a grain of salt, as she says that Dallas sent images of the pilot back to her on the Nostromo. When in the film, they were unable to communicate with each other during the investigation. Earlier in the book, she would also theorize that the alien that came out of the pilot on Acheron was a queen, and that it was responsible for the eggs in the ship's cargo hold. This lends credence to the idea that the Malakak were not the creators of the alien, but it also ignores the fact that at the time of the Nostromo mission, they would have been collecting alien eggs to make xenomorphs for their DNA. Which representation of the pilot's race is your favorite? Aliens Outbreak, Aliens Apocalypse, Original Sin, or the Engineers? The Space Jockey, as seen in Ridley Scott's 1979 masterpiece Alien, has finally returned. This massive skeleton, and others like it, are found in an underground biomechanical city in the video game Aliens Dark Descent. And if they look familiar to you, then you only need to look to interviews and concept art to find out that they are an interpretation of the remains of the Space Jockey that was discovered on LV-426. So let's examine the details of this new iteration, specifically how they compare to the original showpiece created by H.R. Giger, how they fit into the larger Aliens Expanded Universe, one that includes the Engineers, and why I hope that their appearance, even though it's in a video game, might just be a sign that the films of the franchise are now heading in a better direction. The mysterious space jockey of Acheron is also known as the pilot of the Derelict, and in the expanded universe, its race are called the Malakak. According to H.R. Giger, the creature we finally ended up building is biomechanical to the extent that he is physically grown into, or maybe even out of, his seat. He's integrated totally into the function he performs. For Aliens Dark Descent, no name is given, but in concept art they are called Citizens, Ancient Citizens, and Space Jockeys, while the game's AD would note that in line with Giger, they are in fact grown from the biomechanical city. In comparing the two, it should be noted that the specimens are used in different applications. The example on LV-426 was thought to be in control of the derelict craft, whereas the implementation of the citizens is unknown, with examples seen both attached to pillars or walls. With Giger's pilot, the remains look to be more substantial. On the citizens, we have this bleach white skeleton, free of any leftover flesh or skin. On the Acheron specimen, there may be either residual tissues or some other unknown process, a hardening or perhaps a calcification, that has created an ivory tone buildup on the bones. If these ancients are indeed older than the Acheron jockey, it's possible that they've had longer to decompose, but this could also be due to environmental differences or simply artist interpretation. The pilot would also be further integrated into its chair when compared to the citizens. The ivory coloration is bleeding off onto the seat, its shoulder area is joined to and part of the headrest, and its legs have grown into or its torso has grown out of the chair. In contrast, the ancients are simply held to the wall by biomechanical tubing, where their trunks and shoulder spines appear to also be part of the wall. Another key difference is their size, where the ancients are a bit larger. Their estimated height is slightly under their created Xeno Titans, who are bigger than a queen at around 22 feet tall. Whereas the pilot, if it could stand up from its seated position on legs if it had them, was thought to be around 16 to 17 feet tall, only a foot or two taller than a standard queen. Which is all a bit ironic because when Ridley Scott returned to the director's chair for Prometheus, his intention was to make the space jockey and its supposed race nothing more than a suit that is worn by an engineer. But his decision to use shorter engineers for Prometheus, ones that stood around 10 feet tall, left a door open for the jockeys to be their own thing. Now, if he was able to make that third prequel, we probably would have seen his true intentions come to fruition on the screen, with an engineer sitting inside a suit on the LV-426 Derelict. But I think Disney saw this as the wrong choice and canceled the sequel to Alien Covenant. Even so, after Prometheus, the Malakak had been absent from all Alien stories, replaced by the world of the Engineer. That is, until Dark Descent. And even though there's nothing Engineer, Accelerant, or otherwise in this game, we only have to look to another recent game, Aliens Fireteam Elite, where their lore is featured prominently. Thibaut Claudel, a writer and narrative designer for the game, told AVP Galaxy that what we see in the Xeno City in Dark Descent is an alternative story of the Space Jockey. It doesn't have to contradict the prequels, it could coexist. A theory that has been echoed in the Alien role-playing game written by Andrew E.C. Gasca, which it should be noted was given a Thibaut by Disney as a sort of Bible to use when writing the game. By placing the Malakak and the Engineers into the same world, mystery returns to the franchise. If these newly discovered Space Jockey citizens are indeed ancient, then it's possible that they would predate the Engineers and maybe even the Xenomorph. If so, this is not an engineer, and their pathogen and or accelerant could be derived from a Xenotype alien, letting us know that the engineers didn't create the aliens. They only made deacons and other possible creations through hybridization and experimentation. This also would mean that David was merely able to recreate what he learned from the engineers, adding in humans to the mix to make his own variants, the Praetomorph, and with the bombing of Planet 4, the Neomorph. And what is the connection between the engineers and the Malakak? They share a similar technology. Did the pilot's race create the engineers, or are they simply the surviving, evolved, or otherwise changed descendants of the jockeys? Maybe they simply found the tech of the pilots, and now they use it for their own, perhaps even looking to them as gods. There are more players than ever before, and their relation to one another is unknown, leaving much to be explored, with the only constant being that anyone approaches the alien, or that of the aliens, is doomed to be destroyed by them, which creates more of an open slate for future filmmakers and series creators. Now, I don't expect to see Dark Descendants Ancient Citizens in any movie or series anytime soon, But I do think that this move shows that the engineers may no longer be replacing the Malakak, which could eventually make its way into the top-tier film and streaming canon of the franchise.
This place feels old. I mean old.
Even the air feels strange, doesn't it?
In the final level of Aliens Dark Descent, we are introduced to the Xeno City, a vast biomechanical metropolis that was able to grow its own inhabitants, the Ancient Citizens, who are the game's interpretation of the Space Jockey from 1979's Alien. It's a terrifying and seemingly endless landscape, infested by xenomorphs and previously unseen horrors like the Guardians and the enormous Xeno Titans. The Xeno City is located in an expansive underground cavern beneath the Olduvai dig site on Lethe, a moon situated deep into the United American frontier. It was initially discovered during mining operations by the original colonists who would keep the discovery to themselves. However, their secret would only last so long, as they were mining trimonite, the hardest and one of the rarest ores, which would eventually draw the attention of Weyland-Yutani. The company would then annex the moon to begin their own mining in partnership with the United Americas, and in doing so, they would uncover the hidden alien city. The scale here is beyond massive, an entire city buried deep underground in an enormous cavern. It's a mind-boggling landscape that reaches out in all directions with multiple levels that fade off in the distance, only to be obscured by fog. The flooring is composed of what appears to be a mixture of stone and metal supports, and all about them are intricate engravings that could reveal the language of the Ancient Citizens. The towers, the rooms, and other unknown applications appear to have a composition similar to the biomechanical materials used in the construction of the Derelict on LV-426. The towers all have a phallic design to them, keeping with the alien's look and life cycle along with H.R. Giger's themes of sexuality, while the rooms are a realization of his egg silo, an unused concept from Alien. Everything is ominously shaded in gray or black, with hints of blue in the lighting, a possible nod to James Cameron and Aliens, and in the mist or field in the ovomorph rooms of both the Derelict and here in the city. All that remains of its inhabitants are the 20-foot plus tall skeletons that are found attached to various walls and pillars, still grasping levers like they are continuing, even in death, to perform some mysterious function. To clarify, these are not the remains of engineers. Thibaut Claudel, a writer and narrative designer for Aliens Dark Descent, told AVP Galaxy that the game is his idea of an alternate story of the Space Jockey, and it doesn't have to contradict with the prequels. As for the cause of their death, half of the remains show no skeletal trauma, while others have ribcage damage consistent with xenomorph chestburster emergence.
Bones had been outward, like he exploded from inside.
According to the ArtStation page for the AD on Aliens Dark Descent, Sergei Kritsky, the Ancient Citizens are grown from and are part of the city itself. H.R. Giger believed that the Space Jockey on LV-426 was part of the Derelict's massive chair. In his mind, it was more than a simple pilot, it was the control center and brain of a living vessel. I do wonder, though, if they are able to detach from their positions and move about the city. Otherwise, why would it, and the Derelict ships, need to be so expansive? Which raises another question. If they are able to move around, do they grow legs, use some form of levitation, or would they simply pull themselves along with their arms, like the Xeno Titans that use them as hosts would suggest? The official origin of the Xeno City is unknown, and further study of the environment is likely impossible now, as the Cerebus Protocol was enacted in response to the Xenomorph outbreak, and the moon was bombarded with nuclear weapons. The original colonists spread rumors of monsters in the caverns below the Olduvai dig site, but no descriptions are given to pinpoint what was really down there upon their discovery. Even so, it appears that both the human-sized xenomorphs and the new Titan class Ancient Citizen-hosted aliens were present by the time of Weyland-Yutani's arrival. The Codex on the Xeno Titan speculates that the larger examples may have adapted to the larger hosts who were breeding them, but it also mentions that the moon may have fallen victim to a rival species. A curious suggestion, as the only known alien species by the company that could rival the Space Jockeys, other than the Xenomorphs, would be the Engineers. I know the Predators are often suggested as a rival, but they do not exist in Alien Universe canon, only in the AVP and Predator universes. The comic crossovers from the Fire and Stone series did some pretty crazy things lore and canon-wise, but I thought that I'd mention that in Prometheus Omega, an android called Eldon, who was mutated by the pathogen and turned into a strange synth-alien hybrid, believes that the Deacon from the end of Prometheus was also changed by the pathogen, which caused it to mutate and grow around the Prometheus ship into a massive living mountain, and perhaps the Xeno city could have a similar beginning. When the company found the Xeno city, they built the Tantalus base at and below the Olduvai dig site, a technological marvel that would house a highly classified facility that would specialize in xenobiology, xenoarchaeology, and xenotechnology. The base's head researcher in charge was Joseph Marlowe, a brilliant man who would soon begin to lose touch with reality when he began to receive psychic messages from the aliens and from Cassandra, a local who had a powerful mental link with the aliens. He would become convinced that the aliens were the next stage in human evolution, so he would form a cult called the Darwin Era, where he and his followers would seize control of Tantalus and gain access to the Xeno city and its aliens. From here, the now compromised Marlowe and his cult would set to work unleashing the creatures in a multi-pronged attack. They sent ovomorphs in containers to Dead Hills, a colony near the dig site, and they would use the Bentonville supply ship, a nod to Walmart's home office and their eventual takeover of Weyland-Yutani from Alien Resurrection, to bring alien specimens to Pioneer Station, a company facility orbiting the moon. Marlowe would also be responsible for the creation of what they call Guardians, cybernetically enhanced followers who had been implanted with chest bursters only to have augmentations that were able to slow down their maturation process. By keeping the chest bursters in a kind of slowed stasis, they were allowed to coexist with the aliens, and were even able to enter their hives. The bursters couldn't be held indefinitely though, and would eventually burst free, killing the Guardian. However, the main focus of Marlowe's research as father of the cult would be his work with Cassandra, who he saw as the key to xenosynthesis, a bridge between the aliens and mankind. Either on accident or perhaps willingly, he would eventually die as a host for a chestburster, yet his work would continue on, led by an army of synths created in his image. One of which would note that there is much to be learned about the ancient citizens by looking to their murals, though unfortunately, the player never encounters any during the mission, a possible reference to the engineer murals on LV-223. They do, however, come across a containment area holding Xeno-Titan ovomorphs, and while moving through the area, another Marlowe synth would tease them, saying to hurry, the eggs are hatching, only to then admit that he's just kidding, saying that they are safe because the eggs weren't made for them. But who made the ovomorphs? The ancient citizens? A queen stage Xeno-Titan? Or some other process like ovomorphing? And just who were they made for? Their size would indicate that they were made for other ancient citizens, the largest of the known aliens. And we only need to look to the history of the engineers, the humans, and even their AI to know that they would likely be weaponized and exploited for scientific advancements. While talking with AVP Galaxy, Thibaut Claudel mentioned that he and some of the other team members were able to visit the H.R. Giger Museum, and while there, they saw a piece of art that he wanted to be used for the city. Unfortunately, we don't know what work of art he's referring to. My guess is either one of the various landscapes, or it was that concept art for the egg silo, which is definitely present in the Xeno city. However, Thibaut also mentions that his artists were huge fans of the old Dark Horse comics, and that he himself didn't read many of them so as not to taint the story that he was working on. But if you look at Dark Horse's Aliens Apocalypse the Destroying Angels, a brilliant story written by Mark Schultz with artwork by Doug Wheatley, the Xeno city shares many similarities to the Space Jockey city found in the comic, all the way down to its building design and even its placement underground. Now, it's not mentioned in the interview, but another possible influence could be the amazing unused concept art of an engineer city done by Kang Lee for earlier drafts of Alien Covenant, and even if they never saw it, it's a beautiful representation of a similar idea. I don't believe this was the intention of the writers of the game, but perhaps the city not only made the ancient citizens, but it also made the alien ovomorphs as well. To be clear, the Weyland-Yutani Codex from Dark Descent states that they believe that the alien was an infestation, and that it was brought from the outside into the Xeno city. However, they also state that this is only an assumption. There has always been this curious biomechanical link that seems to flow from the alien, to the Derelict, to the Space Jockey, and even to the engineers. This is because the first three were all designed by H.R. Giger, and the engineer suits are alien in their inspiration and design. But I also believe that to Giger, his creations were all related and were all part of his biomechanical world, with the prototype for the alien and the Space Jockey both coming from his art book, the Necronomicon. There's even evidence of this connection in the egg chamber of the Derelict. In his concept art of the inside of the egg silo, he included bulbous birthing structures on the side of its walls that would create the eggs, which would then move along tracks down into the holding area below. As the scripts would evolve, the silo would get cut as its own separate area, along with its bulbous egg-making structures, and its interior would be moved into the Derelict. Add to this that Giger saw the pilot as part of the ship, and we get a craft that could create both Space Jockeys and Xenomorphs. So what is your favorite representation of the Xeno city? The Dark Descent example? The one from Dark Horse's Aliens Apocalypse, The Destroying Angels? Or the one for the Engineers by Kang Lee? Alive, yet sleeping in stasis, concealed in the biomechanical Xeno city, and using the ancient citizens for its hosts, are the massive Xeno Titans, an alien beast with a unique design that has ties to the Space Jockey of LV-426. In the video game Aliens Dark Descent, the final level takes place underground on the moon of Lethe in the Xeno city, a biomechanical metropolis that grew its own inhabitants, who in concept art are called Space Jockeys and Ancient Citizens. When Weyland-Yutani would acquire the moon for mining purposes, they would uncover the city, though its citizens by that time were all long dead, with their skeletons found throughout the area, still attached to various walls and pillars. By the looks of things, their ending was abrupt, and there is evidence of a xenomorph outbreak, with a number of skeletons suffering alien-type exit wounds to their rib cages. The resulting alien, the Titans, are enormous, standing above a queen at around 22 feet tall. Richard Massa is an animation director, multimedia artist, and creature designer who worked on the game, and his ArtStation pages are full of his brilliant 3D concept sculpts and charcoal drawings detailing the evolution of the Titan, where it originally had a skull much like the drones, which would be replaced with a crest that more resembles the more ornate crowns of the Praetorians and the Queens. The example encountered here was in what Richard calls its nest, a hollowed out section below the remains of an ancient citizen, the entrance of which was cleverly concealed as the hole was perfectly fit for the Titan's crest. Richard has even included an illustration with notes showing the inspirations behind the Xeno Titan. First up is the Tequila Worm, a creation for Poltergeist 2 done by H.R. Giger, designer of the biomechanical aspects of the alien universe. At this stage, the creature had no real legs, and instead had two small tentacles coming off of the torso where each leg would be. Those tentacles, or appendages on the worm, also called the vomit monster, could be referencing the small claws that help the Titan move around in place of legs. I'd also note that the skeleton-like design of the vomit monster's included image is also similar to the look of the Titan's rear at the base and tail. Fan theories have circulated for decades that the Space Jockey could be without legs, as even Giger was quoted as saying, "The pilot is biomechanical to the extent that it looks as if he has physically grown into his seat, or maybe has grown out of the seat, giving the possibility of a legless jockey, or as their race is called in the expanded universe, the Malakak." In the next inspiration, we see that the face of the Titan is taken directly from the Space Jockey, where Richard saw the pilot and the citizens as having no lower jaw, making it absent on the Titan. The massive aliens would also have a distinctive hand design, with long claws, referred to as sloth claws, for climbing, that additionally may have helped them in digging out nests in the hard biomechanical environment. The final inspiration shown is a cat's claw pointing to what Richard notes is an extended tongue for increased reach, and a cat claw-like appendage for a lethal embrace, though I can't help but wonder if it's also a nod to H.R. Giger's unused alien runner for Alien 3, a sleek and deadly hunter with soft lips and deadly cat-like claws. When awoken by the unsuspecting team, the Xenotitan would strike from the shadows where it would grab one of the soldiers in its mighty jaw, both crushing and impaling him. Now fully risen, the monster xenomorph was unfazed by pulse rifle fire, as it swatted a marine aside like he was a bug. With only small claws for legs, it would drag itself along with its arms, yet it was surprisingly mobile, nearly keeping up with the group on foot, while making its own shortcuts by bashing through parts of the city, and eventually cutting them off by using a lower level. With the alien blocking their way out, Jonas Harper would use his psychic abilities, perhaps combined along with his daughter's own capabilities, to crunch back the teeth on the Titan's jaw, resulting in obvious pain, causing it to recoil, which allowed the team to escape. However, he did this at a high cost, as he died shortly thereafter, with his effort only stunning the Titan momentarily. The fate of the Xeno Titan, however, is unknown, though it was likely destroyed when the site was bombarded with nuclear weapons to contain the outbreak. According to the codex on the Xeno Titan, the city ultimately succumbed to an infestation of xenomorphs, which eventually adapted to the ancient citizens' formidable morphology. Those who are curious as to the reason for this believe that the ancient citizens originally bred the creatures on Lethe, or that their moon perhaps fell victim to a rival species. So in their travels, like the original backstory for the Space Jockey, the ancients found xenomorph ovomorphs and gathered them up for study, which led to the outbreak. Or perhaps, as I speculated in my video on the Xeno city, the city itself may have created the ovomorphs, with or without the help of the ancient citizens, showing another possible link between the aliens and the city, beyond their biomechanical nature and Giger-influenced designs. This could even explain how in the 3D renderings and concept art, we see that the Titans are connected to the city while in their nest by what Richard Massa calls umbilical cord-like pipes. The reasoning for the connections are not explained, but the pipes make me wonder if the alien is drawing energy from the city in a symbiotic process. Or perhaps the alien is more like a parasite and is stealing resources from the living city. Or maybe it's doing this to tap into the city and be aware of its territory, like a spider on a web or a queen as she is suspended and connected to her hive. As for the belief that the moon could have fallen victim to a rival species, if they aren't referring to the xenomorphs as the rivals, then maybe they are referring to the engineers. The original scriptwriter for Prometheus, John Spates, said that the original ideas for a prequel trilogy included differing factions that existed within the engineers, both good and evil angels. So it's also possible that the ancient citizens are a group or faction of the Malakak, and they are the ones responsible for the outbreak. Either way, the Xeno Titan is not the first of the Space Jockey xenomorphs. There have been others in the expanded universe, like the example from the Dark Horse comic, Aliens Apocalypse, the Destroying Angels, and the one from the Aliens Infestation video game. And even though it was unused in the main canon, the Ultramorph was a concept of a Space Jockey alien hybrid that was intended for Prometheus that would eventually change to become an engineer-hosted Deacon. As a fan of the Alien franchise, the most common question that I often get asked would have to be just what is my favorite design of the alien? To me, that's a pretty hard question, especially when you count the depth of variation that exists in the expanded universe. There's just something about the xenomorph on a basic level that allows it to keep its balance between terror and beauty no matter what configuration it's put into. That said, there is one variant out there, a piece of unused concept art from Prometheus, that upon seeing it has stuck with me like no other xenomorph since the first time I saw Big Chap in Alien. Today, let's take a closer look at what could have been and what I would love to see appear in some future Alien franchise film, one of my favorite xenomorph concepts, the Ultramorph. In the early drafts for Prometheus, back when the working title was still Alien Engineers, writer John Spates had the film playing out as a direct prequel to Alien. Taking place on LV-426 instead of LV-223, a crew would encounter the Ultramorph, an alien born of the famous Space Jockey discovered by the crew of the Nostromo. One of my favorite concept artists, Carlos Huante, was tasked with drawing up images of what this creature would look like. He talks about the realization that this film would take place before the H.R. Giger style would come into effect, and that this made him try to come up with a complementing art style to the Giger designs that would later follow. He says that both he and Ridley Scott agreed that everything should have a white and embryonic look to it. As a direct reference, Carlos went to the origin of the alien, H.R. Giger's Necronom 4. Not only are the images very similar, but it made me realize for the first time that both the Ultramorph and the Necronom 4 biomechanoid are not covered in the traditional alien exoskeleton-like armor. Instead, they're covered by a pale semi-translucent skin. Later in the writing process, in order to get more in line with that big chap from Alien, the decision was made to give the creature a more traditional xenomorph-like armor, ditching the pale skin idea for use with human-bred aliens, not jockey or engineer-bred ones. Initially, Carlos came up with the idea that what if the engineered technology is all of that ribbing and bony architecture that's all over the ship and the alien itself? He says that the aliens that are born out of humans should be clean and skin covered because they're not yet saturated with the genetic material of the source, i.e. the engineers, just yet. So they are more human looking. The Ultramorphs should be the first we see of the bony exoskeleton on a creature. An interesting idea, even if it didn't get used. It could even explain how the pressure suits that the engineers wore in Prometheus are created. Unfortunately, the Ultramorph would lose its place in the scripts, getting replaced by the Deacon, while the idea for these white embryonic aliens would be shelved for later use with the Neomorphs and Alien Covenant. What we do know about this Xenomorph variant before they were placed in the unused Xeno bin for later use by Fox/Disney is that they were huge, and I'm talking like 15 to 16 feet tall or around 4.5 meters. This made perfect sense as they were born of the engineers, and at this point in the scripts, their look wasn't finalized, yet most of the designs had them as much taller than the engineers we got in Prometheus, lining up more with the size of the original Space Jockey in 1979's Alien. It was also mentioned that the Ultramorph would grow into its adult form extremely quickly, another trait that would be used later on by the Protomorphs and Neomorphs. The concepts show an alien with features lining up very close to the Necronom 4 alien, with sleeker, more elongated heads and bodies, along with one sporting the same eyes of the original inspiration. I have to say, I always liked the lack of eyes on the Xenos throughout the films, and especially liked it when you could faintly see that skull underneath the dome. That said, I'm not sure which look I like better here, the one with the eyes, paying homage to Giger's first take on the creature, or the ones with the bulging faceplates. Each one is horrifying, yet graceful in its own way, and something I definitely love to see on film. Fans of the franchise have long pondered just what an alien born of a space jockey would look like, and looking to the expanded universe, the idea has already been done with the Dark Horse comic Aliens Apocalypse, The Destroying Angels. Here, the space jockey bred Xeno, dubbed the Destroyer, had a design more like that of the original Big Chap, coming in a bit shorter than the Ultramorph at around 12 feet or 3.5 meters. Another incarnation would pop up in the Nintendo DS game Aliens Infestation, with this one having more of a jockey-like head than the others. I've said it before and I'll say it again, ideas that happen from within the Alien franchise that go unused have a habit of showing back up in later films. I really hope that this happens with the Ultramorph. To me, it's a beautiful design, and the very idea of just what kind of alien came out of the space jockey in that derelict craft on LV-426 has intrigued me for over 30 years. What are your thoughts and questions on the Ultramorph? Is this not one of the most badass alien concept designs from the franchise? Do you want to see this used in a later film? I'd love to hear your response down in the comments. The Xenomorph, sleek and deadly, has always been a main focus of the Alien franchise. Yet when you peer through the acid-tinged smoke, it was the pilot or space jockey that mesmerized many viewers of the original film back in 1979. Today I want to take a look at the secretive alien that we just don't know enough about. Let's look at the space jockey's race as they were known in the Aliens Extended Universe long before the Engineers and the prequel films. Director Ridley Scott's been quoted as saying, "No one asked one very big simple question. Who was the guy in the suit? Who was the popular character that got the name Space Jockey? Just who was that? Why was he there?" James Cameron would later refer to the pilot as the big dental patient, yet the creature would not make another film appearance in the franchise until the return of Ridley Scott for his Alien prequels. Yet if we look to the comic books and novels in the Aliens Extended Universe, the Space Jockeys have made several appearances where we can learn quite a bit of information from them. The comic books version of the pilot here, if we remove his spacesuit, looks very much like a fleshed out version of the Space Jockey that we saw in the original Alien film. Even though the pilot here in the comic book is shown wearing a spacesuit, it's not like the Engineers in Prometheus, where the original Space Jockey exoskeleton itself is the suit. Some fans have even jokingly compared the original comics' facial designs of the pilot to that of Watto from the Star Wars prequels. The pilot was able to fly in his first appearance in the comic books, yet it's not noted if the spacesuit that it was wearing was responsible for this flight ability. It had some kind of weapon that was able to kill aliens, but it was fired off panel, so we didn't get to see what actually caused the blast. The creature had a device in both of its hands, so either one of them could have been a weapon. The main ability of the Space Jockey that we see here is its telepathic abilities. The alien was able to connect telepathically to Billy after killing the Xenomorph. She described it at first like a million suns that had exploded inside of her head. She then saw images that portrayed primal instinct, hunger, pain, fear, and then hatred. She saw her father's death playing out in her head, seeing him find the derelict ship on LV-426, watching him as he finds the eggs and gets attacked by a facehugger. The Space Jockey then showed her images of his companion crashing its ship on LV-426, the very ship that her father had discovered that fateful day. She knew that the pilot had killed these aliens out of revenge. The Giants race had some tie to these aliens, either by creating them or by experimenting on them until things went south. We come to find out later that the Space Jockey had been telepathically manipulating the humans in order to convince them to try to wipe out the aliens on their own home planet. On top of this, the pilot had planned to take advantage of the situation on Earth in order to take the planet for itself. You see, at the time, Earth was infested with aliens and the humans had all but given up. In the short story follow-up titled The Alien, the pilot was able to put the derelict craft in orbit around the Earth and use its terraforming abilities that were on board the ship to begin changing the planet below, making it uninhabitable for humans. A team would then meet with the Space Jockey to try to take back Earth, and it's here that we get to see the true strength of the alien, as it pummels and rips apart androids like they are nothing. It's not until a chestburster is unleashed on the giant that we get to see true fear in its eyes. Later in the comic book Aliens Apocalypse: The Destroying Angels, we get to see a planet that is actually inhabited by the Space Jockeys. It is very Giger-esque in look, and it is just too bad that Alien Covenant didn't have a city that looked like this. Unfortunately for the Space Jockeys here, just like elsewhere, they've had an alien outbreak that has wiped out their population. An interesting piece of information from this comic book though is that the doctor who is investigating the pilot's race found out from the secret group that he works with that they have discovered fossils of alien xenomorphs on Earth that were over 3.2 billion years old. It turns out that the derelict ship from Alien and a separate derelict that was found here in the comic book were both wiped out by aliens around 3.2 billion years ago. He believes that the aliens are a wave of annihilation sent through the galaxy by God. At the time of their last extinction wave through the universe, the Space Jockeys race was at its peak and controlled perhaps thousands of worlds. They were all but wiped out by the alien plague. In this story, we have only one living pilot left, and he is in stasis throughout the whole comic. The only new information we get about the Space Jockeys here is that we get a different design look as to how a living one might look. Here the alien looks like it may be even taller than 15 feet tall. It's very heavy set and almost looks slightly obese. It has long flowing gray hair on both sides of its head. We never get to see the giant alien awake. Instead, it's infected by a facehugger from a rogue android, and the ensuing alien, a jock xenomorph, is created. Similar to the Ultramorph of early Prometheus drafts, this creature is a huge alien, looking much like a normal xenomorph, only browner in color and much, much larger. This thing kills everything in its path, xenomorph and humans alike. Another notable appearance of the Space Jockeys from before the prequels came out is the original Sin novel. Original Sin was one of the first Dark Horse Aliens novels that wasn't adapted from the comic book series. In the book, it turns out that the governments on Earth have been aware of the aliens all along. There was a group called Loki that was created in order to have negotiations with the Space Jockeys and to deal with the xenomorph threat. Loki ends up designating the Jockeys' race as the Malakak. They supply the Malakak with humans to test on, and in turn they allow the group to have access to resources that they have on their own controlled planet. We find out that the Malakak have grown sterile as a race, and that they are experimenting on the aliens and humans to try to allow themselves to breed once again. Today I want to take a look back at the original Space Jockey from 1979's Alien. Many of us know from Prometheus and Covenant that the Space Jockey is meant to be an engineer in a suit. This addition to the Aliens universe has caused a huge rift between fans who either like or hate the prequels. Because of this, I thought I'd take a look back and see if I could do some research from around the time of the release of Alien to see what were the early ideas for the Space Jockey, pre-engineers. In case you don't know it, Dan O'Bannon was the writer and creator of Alien, along with Ronald Shusett. However, the main plot and ideas came from Dan O'Bannon, so I'd like to take a look back at his early ideas of Alien to see what we can find out about the mysterious Space Jockey. To begin with, we have to remember that in the original script, the egg chamber that we see inside the Derelict in the 1979 Alien film was not there. It was located in a pyramid on LV-426 in the area next to the abandoned Derelict ship. It was due to budget crunches and time constraints that they ended up moving the egg chamber from the pyramid into the Derelict. It wasn't until the prequel movie Prometheus that we actually got to see these pyramids done right on film. To begin our story on the Space Jockey, somehow the Space Jockey's race ends up on LV-426. They are a race of explorers and archaeologists, and they are fascinated by the pyramid and other structures as well as the unknown culture that exists within. One of these jockeys eventually finds the egg chamber and ends up getting face-hugged by one of the aliens. He is rescued by his colleagues and they return to their spacecraft. It is then that the alien chestburster is born into this world by eating its way through the ribcage of the Space Jockey and making its way into the ship, trying to kill the rest of the crew. The other jockeys eventually kill the alien, but its acid blood eats through the hull of the ship, leaving them stranded on the planet. The surviving Space Jockeys send out a message of warning that there is a dangerous parasite on the planet and that nothing can be done to save them. They note that no one should attempt a rescue mission to the planet, and the remaining jockeys slowly starve to death. These early ideas, however, never made it too far, as the producers ended up making revisions to the film. They ended up completely removing the alien pilot and any references to other aliens from the film. They even went so far as to replace the Space Jockey with a dead human skeleton and wanted to make the alien an experimental human bioweapon. Both O'Bannon and Shusett were upset by the rewrites and resubmitted their original script. This time, however, Ridley Scott himself went to bat for some of the ideas in the script. He knew that because of the pressure from Fox that they had to cut down time in the movie and that a 3-hour version of Alien was not going to make the studios happy. Unfortunately, this meant cutting away many areas of the film. Luckily, Ridley was able to get the Space Jockey added back in. However, they then decided to add the egg chamber from the pyramids into the Derelict to save space and time. The early look for the pilot or Space Jockey has changed quite a bit since the original ideas. The early designs were done by Chris Voss, Mobius, and Ron Cobb. Dan O'Bannon particularly liked the designs of the Space Jockey that were done by Ron Cobb. He was even quoted in Cinefex as saying, "It was just perfect. It had a very large cranium and 4 or 5 eye sockets, a very small jawbone, and no teeth to speak of. Of course, I expected it to look horrible when you first see it in the film, but then you looked a bit closer and discover that it didn't have the large teeth or mandibles, or any of the other things that are characteristic of a carnivore. And then maybe you'd begin to imagine it as some totally non-violent herbivorous creature sailing around in space." Unfortunately for O'Bannon, Ridley Scott was not as enthused with these designs because he wanted Giger to design the Space Jockey since he had already done the designs for the rest of the Derelict. As with many of the designs from the Alien franchise, the look of the Space Jockey was taken from Necronom 5 from the Necronomicon book. Scott had chosen this image because he wanted, and I quote, "a fossil almost, one which you'd have a hard time deciding where he leaves off and the chair on which he died begins." So here they are with this dead Space Jockey frozen in death to the weapon he was firing when he died, and he's kind of gargoyle-like and spooky. The pilot, in fact, is seemingly fused to its chair, a literal representation of Giger's biomechanical art and an element contributing to the incomprehensibility of the character. The creature we finally ended up building is biomechanical to the extent that he is physically grown into or maybe even out of his seat. He's totally integrated into the function he performs. These revisions made drastic changes to the Space Jockey, as well as for the reasoning for him being there. With the original ideas, the aliens were native to LV-426, or in the very least, they were there before the Space Jockeys were. The jockeys were not responsible in the least for the alien creatures. They were simply exploring space when they came across the aliens on LV-426. So in this story, the Space Jockeys are not engineers, nor are they in any way responsible for the existence of humans on Earth. They were explorers, learning what they could by discovering unknown planets and life forms.